So I'm going to talk about the agriculture sector, where I feel there is emphasis on this energy transition, but perhaps is not as upfront as it is in other sectors, electricity or perhaps urban transport. But India has been at the forefront of a lot of these renewable energy work in the form of solar irrigation pumps, and I'm going to just talk through what is the agricultural challenge we have in terms of irrigation and its carbon intensity, and whether solar irrigation pumps, which is again a technology, a renewable technology, is a solution, or does it also open another can of worms. I really appreciated Professor Mohan's presentation, where he kind of questioned this entire technology focus. And I mean, from my perspective, technology can be a part of the solution, but not the solution per se, unless we also look at other issues such as equity and justice. With that, so some of the central arguments around decarbonization of the irrigation sector and agriculture. So within agriculture, there are various sources of emission. Even fertilizer is a huge source of emission. A lot of different water management practices have emission footprint. But here I'm covering one of the largest one, which happens to be the irrigation sector. So India's irrigation sector is highly energy intensive mostly because of its high dependence on groundwater. And here the solar irrigation pumps can actually play a very important role in terms of reducing carbon intensity of irrigation. But in the process, one of our fears is that it might actually exacerbate India's groundwater problem, because it so happens that so one of the major determinants of farmers pumping behavior, other several studies have shown, is actually the cost of energy pricing. How are farmers paying for that energy? So a diesel farmer on an average, because the per unit cost of diesel is high, and for every unit that a farmer pumps, they are paying a high marginal cost. So all our experience shows from the subcontinent that farmers tend to use their diesel pumps really, really sparingly. I mean, only for life-saving supplemental irrigation. Of course, that means that their crop potential is not met to the fullest. They always kind of do, supplemental irrigation, as I said, life-saving. So they don't really realize the full crop yield potential. So, on an average, if a diesel pump in India, especially Eastern India, is used for say 300 to 500 hours in a year, the electric pump on a low tariff or on a flat tariff would be for the same plot of land would be used easily 3 times as much as a diesel pump, because it's really the energy cost that is one of the major determinants. So, one of the things with the solar irrigation pump, one of the apprehensions that we have is solar irrigation pumps, after your high upfront cost, and which is also subsidized in lot of the countries, including India. After you have paid for the high upfront cost, your marginal cost for pumping is kind of negligible, though you still have a control in the sense that you can only pump for 7-8 hours a day, not more than that, maybe more like 5-6 hours a day. But the point is that farmers don't really pay any marginal cost. So does it encourage them to over extract groundwater? And that's an open question. That's an empirical question. We don't know enough about it. So I want to pitch this entire argument of energy transition and the entire context of mitigation from a water lens. We are investing in a lot in mitigation, as we have to given the climate change situation, but are we considering the land and the water impacts of those mitigation measures? Because I mean, in a context like India, where water is already an issue, can some of this mitigation put us in a more difficult situation? So, just a historical background, I think this is again quite well known within the agriculture sector, but I understand we have audience from various sectors. So, India's groundwater irrigation kind of expanded along with the green revolution. Actually, it's the groundwater, contrary to a lot of the popular opinion that it was the canals in Punjab and Haryana that fuel groundwater. The reality is it was groundwater. That kind of was the major source of irrigation for farmers. And in this diagram, this is based on Government of India data. You can see that during the time of India's independence, our irrigation was much more limited than it is now, of course, but at that time it was surface water in the form of tanks and in the form of other sources. And other sources could be again a lot of different kinds, like again surface water, but also somewhere open dug wells, etc. But basically it was tanks and canals that were the major sources of irrigation. And the blue line shows groundwater irrigation, that is mostly tube wells and other wells. This took off from the mid 70s, early to mid 70s, and that is exactly the time of the Green Revolution. And we see kind of uninterrupted growth in groundwater, India's groundwater dependence since then. Uh, so, am I audible? It says that my internet connection is stable. So let me know at any point, and I'll switch off my video to just
No, no, no.
save bandwidth.
You're perfectly clear. We can hear you.
Okay, okay. So there has been a little bit of slowdown in growth of groundwater post 2000, and there are various reasons for it. But it's still groundwater accounts for 60% of India's irrigated area is irrigated by groundwater, and that's huge. India is the world's largest user of groundwater, estimates at around 250 cubic kilometers of groundwater, while that's like almost one fourth of world's groundwater is being used and extracted in India. Of course, large portion of it is renewable. It's not as if we are mining groundwater or anything. These are all annually recharged, but the volume itself is huge by any standard. And after India, it's USA and China, and even combining together USA's and China's volumetric use of groundwater is nowhere near India's. So we had a completely groundwater dependent agricultural economy. So that's, I think, a very important point when it comes to energy transition. Then okay, so these are a number of figures. So India also does something called the minor irrigation census. Every 5 or 6 years, it enumerates every single wells and tube wells in the country. That started in 1987, and it is a fantastic resource. And not many countries maintain such a roster of their wells and tube wells. And here, I want to just show the very like the rapid increase in irrigation in the 1990s, particularly number of wells and tube wells in that decade. So if you keep your eyes at one point, and every dot here shows 5,000 wells and tube wells, and this is the data for 1987. We had around 6.2 million wells and tube wells in 1987. This went up to 11.5 million in 1994, up to 18.5 million in 2001. Then there was a bit of a pause in the sense from 18.5 million, it went up to around 19.7 million in 2007. And this is the latest number we have currently, according to the last minor irrigation census, the fifth one, which enumerates data from 2013. India had 20.5 million wells and tube wells. So it might look as if our number of wells are kind of plateauing, which they are, but that doesn't necessarily say anything about the volume of extraction. For one, we don't have any direct measures of volume of extraction. Most of it are kind of estimates based on various assumptions. But one thing that is happening, and the minor irrigation census brings it out clearly, is that the number of deep tube wells are on the rise. So even though the number of tube wells per se, number of wells, like number of structures have kind of stagnated between, there wasn't much movement from 19.7 million to 20.5 million, just addition of like less than a million wells and tube wells in like 6 years. The fact is that many of those earlier dug wells and shallow depth tube wells got converted into deep tube wells, which essentially means that they cover more area and they can extract more volume of water. So in other ways, what I want to say is that India's dependence on groundwater irrigation absolutely continues unmitigated. Okay. And so there have been various consequences. Actually, there have been various positive consequences of Green Revolution. Let me not give the impression that Green Revolution was, negative all throughout. It wasn't. I think only yesterday I saw a series of papers that have done a very good, rigorous kind of work to show the impact of Green Revolution revolution on child on reducing child malnutrition and improving child health and maternal outcomes. And there have been several. We are all aware about the poverty reduction contribution of green revolution, that Punjab, Haryana are prosperous or have higher income than most other states. I mean, so there have been various positives about green revolution, including the fact that we are food grain secure now. But on the negative side, the major one has been around groundwater. So that we are food secure is at the cost of our groundwater resources. And if you see, this one also has very kind of regional consequences. India, given such a big country, obviously, there is no one Indian story, right? I mean, the groundwater story that we often hear is the story of over extraction and of depletion, which is a very true story. And in this map, this is a map from the Central Groundwater Board. You can see that every red blocks here are over extracted, which means that in these blocks, more groundwater is being extracted than there is annual renewable recharge. So again, I want to underscore that for most of it, groundwater is a renewable resource. It's not like petroleum in any way. Rainfall recharges groundwater year after year. But having said that, if you are extracting more groundwater than what rainfall can recharge on a yearly annual basis, which means that groundwater levels will continue to go down. And this is exactly what has happened in many parts of India. A lot of it is in Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, most of the southern states. The exception, on the other hand, is Eastern India, which also has a lot more groundwater resources because it receives a lot more rainfall. But also the aquifers are of a certain nature. These are alluvial aquifers which have a higher water holding capacity, in simple words. But here, because of various reasons, Eastern India doesn't have so much of electrification. Farmers here have depended largely on diesel pumps. I have another map that shows the kind of the energy divide in India. I think I didn't put it in this presentation, but happy to show it at some point. So there is a clear energy divide in India. Farmers in all the blocks, farmers in northwestern and southern India depend on electric pumps, while farmers in eastern India depend on diesel pumps. And diesel pumps, as I said, because the energy costs are high and the marginal costs are high, farmers can only exploit so much. So we have to keep this mind, this regional disparity, and I'll come to the implications of that. So overall, the impact of green revolution on agriculture is significant.
Hi, Aditi. I think we've lost you.
Hi, I think I got disconnected, right?
Yes, you did. You're back online now, but we lost you, I think, when you were just
Yeah.
transitioning to the
Okay.
other slide. I think you ended by telling us about the energy divide and the diesel and
Okay.
yeah.
Right. Okay. So what I was saying, the point of showing all those maps, and that's another presentation altogether, talking about the complete, inappropriate policies we have. We have policies in parts of Punjab and Haryana where farmers extract groundwater from 100 feet and get free electricity, versus in Bihar where farmers extract from 10 feet and pay quite a high price. That's another entire presentation altogether. But today here I wanted to focus on the limited issue of the high carbon intensity of India's irrigation. So according to various estimates, irrigation contributes to around 10 to 8 to 11% of India's total carbon emission. And even more importantly, I feel that especially diesel, which is quite rampant in eastern India and the entire Indo-Gangetic belt to a large extent, high black carbon emissions. And I know some of us here are interested in air quality issues, and irrigation actually is a contributor to high black carbon, depending on depending on so the impacts here are some numbers. These are all estimates, nothing sacrosanct, but just to give a kind of an idea of the amount of gigatons of black carbon, the emissions that comes from irrigation. And black carbon negatively impacts agricultural production. We have studies showing that wheat yields can go up down by up to one third because of black carbon. health impacts, I think there isn't a single Indian who isn't aware now, or who isn't one way or the other, getting their lives shortened due to black carbon and PM 2.5 and whatnot. So there the health implications are just so clear. And of everything that contributes to these pollution, agriculture happens to be also, irrigation happens to be one of those. So therefore, solar irrigation seems a very promising technology. Kind of India's overall journey, those solar irrigation pumps have been around from 1990s. They were kind of one of those really high cost, really futuristic, and nobody ever thought that they would be actually practical. That was the kind of things that universities and research labs did,
Hi.
just to figure out if those things work.
Sorry, Aditi, I just had to jump in. You just hit the 15-minute mark. You can borrow a couple of minutes, no problem,
Okay.
to indicate the sense of time.
Okay,
We have
okay,
about
okay. Oh, thank you so
8
much.
minutes left.
Yes, yes, I will finish. Yeah. So the major program that was launched was around 2010. That was the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission. Even though that particular mission did not have any focus on solar irrigation pumps, at that point already India had around 7,500 DC pumps, which was very, very expensive. Then around 2012, the first kind of solar subsidy program started, with Rajasthan launching the first subsidy program. At the same time, technology evolved. We had introduction of AC pumps, and panel and pump costs also declined. Then around 2014, there was the MNRE launched the first national SIP scheme. I think it was around the target of reaching 1 million scheme with the allocation of 400 crores. And that was kind of the first time that there was a design of a national kind of a subsidy scheme, etc. By 2016, most states had launched SIP program, and initially the all are with very high subsidy, 70% plus subsidy in most cases, with 30% subsidy coming from the central funds, and then the state governments topping up according to different numbers. And these were promoted by different departments. Some of them were promoted by renewable energy, some by DISCOM, some by agriculture department. But at that time, it was mostly around replacing diesel pumps, because by this time, 2016, SIPs had become competitive with diesel pumps in terms of the total life cycle analysis. That was around the time my colleagues at EMI Tata program in Anand in Gujarat, they started this experiment with grid connected SIPs in Gujarat. Can they also be an alternative for electric pumps? So that is when that started. In 2018, the government launched the Kusum program. There are Kusum A, B, C components, of which both Kusum A and C have a component on grid connection. And then 2020, I think the question that's staring at us is, will grid connected solar pumps incentivize farmers to use groundwater more efficiently? Right now, we have around 250,000 plus SIPs. That's again highest anywhere as far as I'm aware, but it's still like a tiny 1% of our total pumps. And then majority of them are unfortunately in same overexploited states. So again, I have shown the numbers, except for this is Chhattisgarh, but overall you can see that number of these SIPs are quite high in Rajasthan and Gujarat compared to Eastern India, where they are quite lesser in number. In the case of the solar pump map, each point is like one pump. So again, we are kind of replicating the same groundwater outcomes that we inherited as a result of Green Revolution. In the sense that majority of the pumps are coming up where there is already groundwater overexploitation. So I feel that there are three major concerns when it comes to solar irrigation. First is water. Will SIPs exacerbate India's groundwater crisis? The second, and that is in view of these Kusum A and Kusum C components of the scheme, national scheme, is that many of the DISCOMs are looking towards promoting SIPs as a way of reducing their subsidy burden, because of the free electricity or subsidized electricity, the state burden of subsidy is quite high. So if you kind of subsidize solar pumps once and for all, then these DISCOMs will not have to provide, or rather state governments would not have to provide subsidy year after year. So can that kind of solve that? And I feel the other part is also gender and inclusion. Already our pumps are very democratic, in the sense that even the smallest farmers with very little land can buy a pump or get access to water through water markets. But does SIP, will that SIP limit that? Will then SIPs be only owned by rich farmers, as has happened so far? So I feel those are the some of the three major concerns. For this, we have an ongoing project, SDC supported project, where we are working in Pakistan, Nepal, Gujarat in India, and in Bangladesh. And all these places have different solar programs. So we are evaluating that and all that. I won't go so much into the detail, but some very, very early evidence is that none of the solar, and this is a conference on financing, so I thought I'll bring in some of that. So the financing evidence is that we do get a lot of subsidy for solar, and I know CEW and Karthik and all have a lot of evidence, and all of us know that these subsidies have not really helped for various reasons. But the point is, the subsidies are literally cornered by wealthy, influential farmers. So can we promote these subsidies in a way that is at least gender inclusive? So we ran a small randomized control trial experiment in Nepal, where we provided where the government provides 60% subsidy, and we topped it up with 10% extra, saying that a woman. So in Nepal, what we did was we topped up the government subsidy. We worked with the government and we said, okay, we'll give you 10% more subsidy, provided that the land is also transferred in the name of the woman, a bit of a like a social engineering. And we actually saw the 77% of the demand came from women farmers. And that kind of worked. It was on a small scale. It was not more than 50 pumps or so. But can we do our subsidy programs in such a way that we have a like kind of an additional kind of incentive for small farmers, for women farmers, to actually adopt this pump? So I think that's one research issue we are quite interested in. Then the other one that we have been working, I mentioned my colleagues in Gujarat have been doing this grid connection of solar pumps. I'm happy to take questions on this. And in all the four countries we're working, there is a lot of interest around grid connection. So what we did here was again a small experiment. We formed a cooperative. We connected around 9 farmers to the grid, gave them solar
Thanks,
pumps
Aditi.
and
Yeah, that's
connected
it.
that
I
to the
missed on the
grid.
screen. Sorry.
And then we provided farmers with a incentive to basically we paid farmers, if they transferred that electricity to the grid, then they earned like around 7 rupees per unit. Basically they were selling electricity to the grid, which is possible now under the kusum A and under the kusum C component, not kusum A component. Kusum A only has grid connection. So basically what it shows is that the data shows that in the first 2 years, this orange bar is, I believe, I can't quite see the yeah, I think this orange bar is the amount of number of units of electricity that farmers sold back to the grid. And you can see that from the since the beginning this number has kind of risen. So this is one very loose way of saying that farmers are pumping less, but we don't quite know if this pumping less means that they're overall pumping less, perhaps they are pumping from other sources. We don't have a definitive answer, but this is certainly some encouraging result to show that it is possible to incentivize farmers to pump less, but instead sell the electricity back to the grid and earn some income. Here, the main point would be the money for which the tariff at which they're selling to the government needs to be attractive enough. In this case, EMI topped up on the utility tariffs and actually gave 7 rupees per unit, which is not what the utility is now offering. Utility would offer like 3.5 rupees per unit. So there is some amount of upscaling in Gujarat. The scheme we are studying is the Surya Kisan Yojana. Some 70 feeders have been solarized. This will not continue, will be replaced by either Kusum A or Kusum C as per the recent guidelines. There is a lot of grid connected SIP replication happening in other states. I already mentioned our project. But I feel it's very important to be aware and track the unintended consequences. I feel this is one of the ways in which our Indian science and policy making suffers. We kind of feel that, okay, we have the solution if we implement it, and we don't do enough follow up. So I just want to leave it at this. It's important to generate rigorous evidence, important to use evidence to influence policy, then measure impact of that policies, and basically then repeat the whole cycle, because there are just so many unintended consequences. And here possibility of two unintended consequences I worry the most about are groundwater and kind of the elite capture of entire irrigation, and both would not have very good outcomes for our farming sector. So thank you very much.